nice.
My first question to them would be, are you not having fun in the first place? That you need to use alcohol to have fun?
To see a kid who's 16, 15 years old who drinks himself to death, that is just one of the most troublesome things to me.
At youth parties, teens tend to consume large amounts of alcohol, and which in turn impairs their judgment relating in traffic-related accidents, fights.
Oftentimes, the intoxicated driver survives the accident and has to live with the guilt knowing that he was responsible for the death of his friends.
The brain during adolescence is extremely sensitive to any alcohol damage, to the toxic effects of the alcohol damage, which eventually will translate into developmental problems and that could potentially affect the brain function during adulthood.
One of the things that's never easy for a police officer is dealing with death or tragedy as it relates to juveniles or children.
The major problem with teenagers and alcohol is lack of knowledge and lack of education. People think it's kind of an innocent thing to let their kids drink or for habit to be accepted. But the reality is there's a lot of different consequences that can actually happen with teenagers drinking. Besides the things that you would think about, the drunk driving, there's brain damage, there's fights, there's violence, there's sexual abuse, there's all kinds of different things that can go on that people don't recognize.
Self-medicating is used in ways to either numb out or not think about problems. Teenagers will drink to kind of forget or not have the proper tools to deal with their feelings, deal with the problems, and not know how to deal with those problems.
There's studies that show that if you start drinking before the age of 15, you're 50 times more likely to get into harder drugs, and not just marijuana, we're talking cocaine, heroin use. So basically, the earlier you start drinking alcohol, especially on a regular basis, the more likely that other addictions are going to unfold. That's why we really try to delay the age where people start drinking, and there is a drinking age of 21.
Alcohol consumption in the adolescent is dangerous. However, a new trend that not so new perhaps 10 years ago, we have seen more reports of alcohol consumption and exposure through different non-conventional routes, such as transanally, in other words, an alcohol enema. That is very dangerous because the absorption is much more quicker. More so when you reach toxicity levels, you lose consciousness, but yet you're still being exposed to the alcohol that goes on. So the point is that any consumption of alcohol is dangerous when you're an adolescent and even as an adult when you do excessively, but also when you get exposed to any other non-conventional methods is more dangerous. And the only reason why young people do this type of ventures is to get a quicker, higher rush.
But we also see the impact on mental health. Some of the kids already have depression or anxiety disorders, but by drinking, what ends up happening is that their depression increases, their anxiety can increase. So now we're going to need to not only treat the alcohol issue, but we're also going to need to be able to treat the mental health issues that coincide with that.
Adolescent alcohol consumptions will have detrimental and permanent damage, such as poor performance, memory problems, lack of concentration, brain damage, cardiovascular disease, and eventually intestinal diseases and damage such as cirrhosis and chronic liver disease. Every single organ that I have mentioned will be a permanent damage that is irreversible.
When we look at binge drinking kids, we're down to less than 20%. That's the lowest that we've ever recorded. That doesn't take into account, though, that still 1 in 5 seniors in high school report binge drinking, which means that they're drinking at least one time, binge drinking one time at least every 2 weeks. So that continues to be a major issue that we have to address.
There's a high amount of binge drinking and the risk involved that they say they want to have fun, and they're not aware of the processing of how alcohol affects the body. They're not aware of how many drinks to intoxication, the amount of time it takes for one drink and alcohol to work within the body. And so they go out and just want to have fun, and before you know it, they're intoxicated to a level that is uncontrollable.
The adolescent brain doesn't fully develop until they're in their 20s. And so anytime, because it's still developing, you provide alcohol or any other kind of foreign substance, it's going to do damage to that brain. In many cases, it can do permanent damage. For example, with the frontal cortex of the brain, where kids learn to make decisions and how to think and analyze, when you drink, it's directly making an impact on that part of the brain. So they're potentially putting permanent damage into their decision-making process, into their judgment process, into their thinking, and they're not going to be able to make sound decisions moving on into their adulthood, and that's irreversible damage.
Some of the risk associated with binge drinking is getting in fights, pulling out guns or protection with weapons that they normally would not do, unwanted pregnancies.
A lot of the times, we've seen stories where these, a young lady will get shot because of just being at the wrong place, wrong time type of thing.
I've had a few clients who have come to me and who have experienced date rape, either as a result of over drinking or as being drugged by a pill. And what that is someone will place a substance into a drink, and the person drinking the drink will drink it, unaware that there's anything in their drink, and in a short amount of time will go into what has been described by them as kind of a blackout point where they don't remember anything. One client I had explained to me she felt very numb and unable to move as the predator had assaulted her.
A couple more shots to the dome, I'm seeing. And you know we the party.
Marijuana right there? On the ground? See that?
Saturday, I think I see a bad girl.
You're under arrest for curfew.
Crashes, serious injuries, especially fatalities among teens, because they also got something else into the system called alcohol or drugs. And those alcohol and drugs really, on an inexperienced driver, makes it worse. And they're driving with a 4,000-pound machine that if they don't know how to control it because of lack of experience, that extra alcohol or drugs can make him a bullet going at huge speeds.
The biggest hazards for the police when you have youth and alcohol combining is the poor decision making that the ingestion of alcohol will lead to, particularly with young people who are inexperienced and may not have dealt with the police before. It exaggerates attitudes and poor decision making.
Do you see this? Look what this call says. Shots fired at your address. We've had multiple 911 calls saying a drive-by shooting.
So we see increased violence or potential for violence from people who have consumed alcohol, and particularly with youth who may not necessarily make the best decisions in the first place.
86Z squad, composed of only a few officers, but officers who are dedicated to making sure that those party crews and other elements, especially on the west side, that throw those great parties in which they charge at the entrance, and especially when it comes to youth alcohol. Young people being asked to come in, pay at the door, and drink from kegs or other activities. Those guys are out there all the time and throughout the city of Phoenix. But more than anything else is that they are there enforcing liquor laws.
By proactively conducting enforcement at these parties, we control the release of the teenagers leaving the parties, in turn which will reduce the number of alcohol-related incidents and alcohol-related driving of the youth leaving the parties.
The Targeted Enforcement Squad, or the Youth Alcohol Squad, is a tremendous tool within law enforcement in our goals to constantly impact public safety in a positive way, especially as it relates to youth alcohol. It's a proactive tool. I think anytime law enforcement can get on the front end of being proactive as it relates instead of reactive to crime, I think that's powerful and in the best interest of the community we serve.
Typically when we come across a party to conduct our enforcement, there'll be the people attending the party at a residence, out in the street in front of the residence, in the front yards, and near adjacent properties. So when we kind of swoop in and conduct our enforcement action and announce the presence of the police.
Hands up, don't do it. Your hands up. Hey, everybody have a seat on their butt. No justice, please. Sit down. No justice, please.
We're capturing people in place wherever they might be. Some of them in transit to the house, some of them leaving from it, some of them in vehicles in front of the house. And so we contact them, we try to get them organized in a way that we can move them as a group to one location so that we could safely process the party, which means contact everybody, get their identification, figure out who they are and what violations they may have committed.
Parties can sometimes get very confusing just because of the sheer amount of youth and people at these types of events. It can be sometimes as small as 5 people and upwards to over 300 people at these events. So our squad is very limited in the amount of manpower that we have available to us. Sometimes we'll need to tap into patrol units to come assist us just because of the sheer size of these events.
When it comes to certain procedures that we do, certain enforcement things that we do, Phoenix is second to none.
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say may be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to the presence of a...
Brian, she's handcuffed her.
Keep coming down.
There's more people coming downstairs. Okay, get out. Let's go.
So we love the relationship, and we're very thrilled with the management of the Phoenix Police Department.
There is never times when we can do things by ourselves. It takes partnerships and relationships to be successful, and our partnership with the state and particularly the Governor's Office for Highway Safety has been impactful. There is financial support there that has provided these guys extra funding to be able to do many of the very important work that they're doing in the community related to youth violence and youth alcohol and awareness.
All right, you two go to your vehicle. If you're waiting on other people that are under, or, you know, that we're not done with, we'll tell them to go out to the vehicle too, but sit in your car.
There's a tremendous amount of considerations that we in law enforcement take into account when comparing the apprehension, detention, and arrest of a juvenile as compared to an adult. First and foremost, we in law enforcement must always respect the letter of the law, and there are different laws in place for juveniles. We must respect the judicial system that's set up. It's a totally separate entity as it relates to the process with which a juvenile goes through our judicial system and our court system. We must always take into account communication with the parents. That's a huge issue for us on a lot of levels.
It's a misdemeanor warrant. Yeah. He'll just have to, he just goes through the process. He'll go see the judge, and the judge will probably, if it's a misdemeanor, he'll probably just release him on a promise to appear.
One of the things when you look at a juvenile detention, arrest, or apprehension, the process with which we go about doing that is elongated. It has a lot more paperwork associated with it, and for good reason, because we're dealing with a child. We're not dealing with a seasoned, mature adult, whether or immature or mature.
I know you're a
At least we're seeing the Super Bowl tomorrow.
I know you're you don't want to
We'll definitely not make the Super Bowl tomorrow.
At the end of the day, you're dealing with a child who we hope to eventually get on track in their lives. It is an immature brain. They have not grown up, and we must take into account all those complexities.
We also deter future parties by citing and arresting individuals for underage drinking. And we also educate the youth at the parties, and we contact the parents and inform them of the youth drinking at the parties.
We'll contact the host of the party and start questioning them about what the event is, who provided the alcohol, and just kind of get a feel for, what's going on here. While that's going on and officers are dedicating their time to speaking with the homeowner or the host of the party, other officers on the squad will start to process the minors under 21 years of age for any alcohol impairment. And that was such as using portable breath test devices. Hello. Thank you. Say what?
Did you get any?
0.015. Or just visual observations that they have of a particular person.
Everyone needs to obey the police immediately, regardless of whether they think they've done something right or wrong. They just need to follow the directives being given by the police.
Sit down.
No, I didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, sorry. She did it. Resisting arrest.
That if you haven't done anything wrong, then you don't have anything to worry about. But overwhelmingly, as long as people are compliant, the police are going to be very, very easy to deal with. We don't have an agenda out to ruin anybody's night. We're there actually to ensure public safety and to make sure that these young people don't get in a car and drive and get in a collision and kill somebody or hurt somebody.
So when you're 16, 17 years old, you just got your license, it's the greatest feeling in the world to have that liberty and that freedom. But what comes along with that is the typical adolescent desire to stay connected on their phones, to talk to friends, to turn the music up loud. All of those are distractions that lead to, in many cases, critical crashes, accidents, fatalities. And when you add alcohol to that equation, the result is not a positive situation. It is so important as educators, part of this greater community, to really bring together a wide array of stakeholders, because we know that together our actions and our programs can really address the concerns of underage drinking. And so from our standpoint, we bring in a community leadership program with our friends at the Teros organization to provide prevention courses for our students, as well as bringing in the Not My Kid organization to work with our parents and give them some capacity building techniques so that they might be able to address this at home as well. And the third piece is ensuring that our educator team is really well aware of what the signs are of underage alcohol abuse and is trained and comfortable in holding those conversations with students so we can really detect and then prevent when we might have a concern.
In working with parents a lot, some of the things that we tell them that you should be looking for to determine whether or not your child might be using alcohol or even other substances would be some of the behaviors such as withdrawal. Are they getting home from school and immediately going to the room? They're not social or interactive with the family anymore. If you're a family that does have alcohol available, do you see that there's alcohol missing from the bottles? Or when you do, if you were to open up the bottle and pour something, is it completely diluted and watered down? Because that's the other thing that we see. How the child is doing from a scholastic standpoint. If they've always been a fairly good student and their grades are starting to fail, then that's something you need to be aware of. And then we also look at the emotional side. Are their moods swings going up and down? Do they appear to be more depressed? When you approach them about things, do they fly off the handle really quickly and really easily?
Many students, their first experience with alcohol can be as early as 13. That's middle school. And we also know from the research that alcohol abuse can be modeled in the home. Even something as simple as a parent asking a child to go grab them an alcoholic beverage can send the wrong message to a child at a young age.
You probably don't have to look too far to hear stories where kids will say that they're sleeping over a friend's house and they'll end up sneaking out to a party that gets, unwanted guests there, fights break out, shootings happen, and bullets know no name. When you get alcohol and kids fighting together, it's not a good combination.
There's a strong desire for kids to want to be like other kids and accepted. So with social media, everything is instant. And to fit in, that is their world, they want to do what others are doing. And I think it does feed into them wanting to be a part of those groups. And if those groups say they're drinking, whether they are or not, it leads to this idea that that's acceptable.
Well, the training that we provide, it starts immediately when we hire a new server. It begins with their orientation. We have rule books and guidelines and stuff like that. And being in an industry that a lot of your servers are underage, you know, we talk about the temptation of their friends coming in and wanting to get served underage, and the actual ease of that to happen. But we warn them of the consequences, you know, about business, themselves, police, their friends, and all the consequences that occur if underage drinking happens. So right away from the beginning, we start talking about the liabilities, personal and business.
It is so important as educators, part of this greater community, to really bring together a wide array of stakeholders, because we know that together our actions and our programs can really address the concerns of underage drinking.
I have a 5-year-old, and to be honest, it scares me to death what she's facing nowadays in her adolescence when she gets there. You know, I always say that it's not necessarily you I don't trust, it's everybody else that I don't trust. And I'd like to make it a world where everybody can be trusted and we're not worried about everybody else's bad decisions.
I've got 7 kids of my own, and I certainly wouldn't want them to abuse alcohol, and I think that's the key word, is abuse of alcohol. Alcohol is something that society has had for eons and generations, and when used in moderation under appropriate circumstances, alcohol is an okay substance. But when it's abused, when it's used to excess, where it causes people to make poor decisions, that's really where it causes a lot of problems socially and within the family unit. And it's really something that needs to be controlled, particularly when it comes to youth, because young people need guidance from adults, whether that's their family or their surrounding community, or just from the law, to guide them to make correct decisions.
One of the things that in working with families a lot is that parents sometimes forget one of their jobs is they're a role model for their child. And so we're telling our children it's not okay to drink, I'm not going to allow you to drink, and yet they see us inebriated on the weekends. We're doing the binge drinking and our behavior's out of control. Or we drink every night after we get home from work and then set a different standard for them. Our children are going to emulate what we do, whether we like that or not.
As a therapist sitting on the other side, it's heartbreaking. It's very emotional to watch their struggles and to really want to help, whether that's with counseling or offering other resources in the community, setting them up with other teenagers who understand where they're at.
They're not pleasant conversations, but they're important conversations that we need to have with our kids and tell them the truth about alcohol.
How long the person drinks and whether the person goes into binge drinking or not, all that really has a different impact into health.
I think as parents, we would like to say we have this magic wand that we could wave over our children and say, hey, look through our lives and what we've experienced and don't make those poor choices. We must turn over every stone as it relates to our abilities to educate these children into what some of those choices, those poor choices, will have on your life and others and those around you. And I think we've got to constantly make sure that that is on the tip of our tongue and fresh in our brain as it relates to that awareness. It's a deep penetrating issue and a feeling to see children loss of life as it relates to some of the decisions they make and utilizing alcohol or experimenting with it.